Okay, now we're going to go ahead and we're moving on to vlog number 7. Vlog number 7, we're going to kind of pick up where we left off. And I decided after I finished vlog number 6, you know what? That we need to make kind of a chart because let's be honest, it's education. We have a whole lot of vocabulary words that sometimes we know what they mean, sometimes we don't know what they mean. Sometimes what I mean by them may not be what you mean by them or somebody else that wrote some blog somewhere else means. So I like pictures. Let's draw a picture. So thus far we've kind of done the Flip 101 and I'm going to go ahead and define Flip 101 as homework in class, video at home. Let's go back. Okay, here we go. Video at home, homework in class. There we go. So it's inside the box, outside the box. Now the box is good because the box is what we have to work with. It is the classroom. That's that group space. You have the independent space out here. And as we talked about last time, Flip 101 can be useful and can be done well. Is it the end-all be-all? No, it's not. But there's a place for it. Now, I've previously talked about flip as a spectrum. Okay, flip as a spectrum, and I like that analogy because flip did have a definitive beginning. 2003, 2005, Aaron Sams, John Bergman, okay. Then you have Reach Every Child Every Day, Bergman and Sams, that's 2012, but it had its roots way back, in the 60s, and so there's other roots everywhere else. But the idea is everything has a beginning, and really the most common accepted version is going to be that Flip 101, also known as Flip Classroom. So if you hear Flip Classroom, most people outside the Flip movement think of this guy right here. It is Flip 101 and Flip Classroom. That's what they mean. That's what they're talking about. But once you kind of get into the process, you realize, hey, there's kind of a little bit more to this. And so we need to kind of think about that. And very quickly, by the way, the innovators here and the early adopters of Flip Learning moved on to something called Flip Learning. By the way, you'll notice my little chart. I'm using a little technique of the Family Feud method, okay, the game show method. I didn't do this. Merv Griffin came up with this method. But what I have is I have my graphics underneath, and I simply put white boxes over the things I'm going to talk about. And so all I have to do is highlight something and delete, and so things will either show up or cover up. So you don't know they're there. I hit delete. There you go. It's actually a nice way that if you're doing some video content to have all this stuff ready, all your notes ready, but to keep it paced. And this is all, by the way, done in Google Drawing, a super useful tool if you're looking for some ways to make things graphically for kids in very, very simple, very basic shape. So, Flip Learning. That's where we kind of begin to swirl the lines. The outside of the classroom and the inside of the classroom start to meld a little bit because the inside of the classroom is not necessarily meant only for homework anymore. It's really meant to be a much deeper learning environment. And so how do we get to that deeper learning environment? Well, we need a couple things. We need to first of all be flexible, all right? Everything about Flip Learning, the whole reason you went to the trouble to create content, the whole reason that you organize stuff is that so you can actually be flexible with what happens outside the classroom and what happens inside the classroom based on the fact that resources are available to everyone 24/7. Then your goal is to set up a learning community. So that learning community it's not about getting the homework done. It's not about that anymore. It's not about getting through the lesson or getting through the book. It's about setting up the expectation that learning is the key thing. Now, I is for intentional content. So that intentional content is going to be what we've really been doing in the last couple blogs. We've been very specific about what do I want students to know? How do I want to present it to them? What are we going to do in class to reinforce this? What are we going to do to expand this? And so that's the intentionality component. It's well thought out, it's well planned. To be honest with you, this is the area where Flip has helped me the most. I was pretty good at doing lectures, but I really didn't prepare very well. This has really pushed me to prepare. And finally, that professional educator, that P component, professional educator. That comes from the fact that you are not less important as a teacher. Some people have the idea that in the flipped classroom, the teacher's job is easier. Not if you're doing it right. Okay, if you're doing it right, it's going to be a lot more work. Now, where am I getting this information? Well, let's go over here and let's go to the Flipped Learning Network. Flipped Learning Network. Honestly, it's one of the very best definitions that I can come up with. So if we go to the definition of flip, we have the 4 pillars. And those 4 pillars start with the flexible learning environment. Now, in this particular case, here we go, went to the wrong thing. Flipped definition of flipped learning. There we go. I got to hit the button or it doesn't go where it needs to go. This definition of flipped learning was put together by Bergman, Sams, and so many others of the early innovators in flipped learning, but it's still a really solid definition. You can read about it here at flippedlearning.org underneath the definitions. If you want other articles about it, that's where I was attempting to go a few minutes ago. So flexible environment, learning culture, intentional content, and professional educator. All of these are laid out that if you truly want to understand flipped learning, this is where you need to start. Now, from there, we can go to a variety of other pieces of the puzzle. Now, with flipped learning, what we can do is we can flex. Sometimes the video's at home. Sometimes the video can be done in class. Sometimes there is no video. Sometimes it's all a matter of activity outside of class or activity inside of class. But the kicker to flip learning is whatever is done in the group space is done because it fits best in the group space. Whatever is done outside of that group space is stuff that can be done by the student independently in that independent space, and working those 2 spaces intentionally for the good of students. Now, you can move on from there and move on to flip mastery. Flip mastery is where you don't move on until the student has achieved the objective. Now, we're familiar with mastery. Why does flip mastery exist? Because flip helps provide those resources when the student needs it, when the student is ready for it, rather than just when I get around to it. So the asynchronous, the not all students in the same place, that can really be enhanced by using flipped learning because you now have a catalog of resources, and those resources are organized as we talked about and can be used so the students no longer have to stay in the same order. Now, you can even move beyond that. You say flip, whatever. And frankly, folks, the spectrum I like because it has a beginning, it moved through a progression, and it still moves through a progression. But the thing I don't like about it is the fact that each of these seem to be in some sort of a hierarchy, when in reality, it's not a hierarchy. It's actually more of a menu or an a la carte, where each of these can be used in their time and in their place, provided that you have a framework in place that allows any of these to be used at any given time. So once you have that framework of content in place, once you have the organizational framework in place, now each of these, or some version or hybrid thereof, can be used. Now, let's play a little educational bingo. All right, since we're in a game show spirit, what about this idea of in-flip? What is in-flip? Well, in-flip is where nothing happens outside the classroom. In fact, what we've been doing over the last couple blogs is actually not preparing for a Flip 101 classroom. We're actually preparing for an in-flip. An in-flip is where the students watch the video in class and do the group work in class and receive live instruction in class and do group projects in class. You say, well, how in the world do you find time to do all that stuff in class? Well, again, with this framework in place that we have all the resources, students can use whatever components of the resources that they need at a given time. So whereas most of the time with my basic students, Flip 101, potentially using an in flip in conjunction with Flip 101 is a really good look because I am controlling the pace, I am controlling where they go next, I'm controlling what they do next, in part because these are students that struggle with organization, attention, etc. So this works out really well for me to help keep their executive functioning components under wraps. But doing it in class means those students that otherwise wouldn't do things outside of class, at least I'm getting their part that's inside of class well-timed, well put together, right when they need it, and you end up being a whole lot more effective than you think. Versus, if I'm in a flip mastery situation, I can also still use an in flip, but now with students working at whatever pace they wish because the executive functioning capabilities are more there, the organizational capabilities are there, that in flip allows them to use their time most effectively in the classroom. And if some of it pours out outside of the classroom, that's okay because those things are still there. And because with a flip mastery situation, you have flexible organization, flexible timing, any of those things. So in flip can be used anywhere you wish. Flip, we've already kind of talked about that from the Flip Learning Network, but I certainly wouldn't call it its own box. What I would do is take it and make sure that this is permeating the entire process regardless of where I put it in a particular level. So in this case, the flip, whether you're doing Flip 101 all the way to flipped whatever, it really needs to be reflective of flexible, learning community, intentional content, and professional educator. So you see the components can be used wherever you wish. Now, what about Explore, Flip, Apply? We actually talked about that way early in our discussions. Explore, Flip, Apply can really work with Flip 101, but more often it tends to be used up in here where we have an exploration that we start out on. Then the students can work independently on getting the components they need and then applying them. So it does tend to work up here, but can work down here just as well. What about problem-based learning? Well, in fact, we started our section with, hey, what if we're setting up a class game, or if we're setting up a class raffle, something like that. We have this problem, and that we're going to use this one problem to address this and to cause a framework for everything we're doing. Again, you start talking about UDL, Universal Design for Learning. Folks that have the challenges that we're talking about in the kind of class that we've been putting together, UDL is what we're all about because differentiation, working with the kids on the fringes, that's exactly who we're talking about. But it can also be the same type of UDL that we would use for students that are high functioning in those executive functions, but also asynchronous, etc. So UDL could be anywhere in here. Now, what about Flip XP? Well, here's the thing. Flip XP is actually a sideways nod to Windows XP, Windows 10, Windows 8. The reality is whatever you call Flip, and however you choose to structure Flip, whether there's 4 components to your definition or 187, it makes no difference as long as what you're doing is good practice that has been justified by research, but also justified by who you have in your class, who you have in front of you every day, and what your skills and your abilities are. So is there a right way to do Flip? My answer is no. There are poor ways to do Flip. There are good ways to do Flip. But in the end, there is no boxed software and there is no boxed canned program. Thus far in the blogs, I hope you've found them to be useful. Hopefully we've talked a little bit about how the terms apply. So next one, I'm going to go just a little bit deeper and maybe give you a couple ideas. You may take them, you may not, but that's the idea. Thanks, folks.